Andy, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Great. Thanks for having me.
We've just kind of having a little bit of a giggle because we've mixed up the times and it started beautifully imperfect, I think is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, beautifully imperfect and an hour late. Thanks to me.
That's funny. It doesn't matter. Look, for people that may not know who you are, what you do, just drop us a little bit of a background so that we can lay the foundation of this episode.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Andy Hill. I'm a professor of sport and exercise psychology at York St John University, where I'm head of postgraduate research, and I also run a research group that looks at motivation, performance, and well-being in predominantly sport. And the vast majority of research that we do is on studying whether or not it's good or bad to be more or less perfectionistic. I've been doing work in this area since about 2005 when I started my own PhD. Published my first paper in this area in 2008, and probably we're at this point kind of 80 papers in, 15 years in to trying to understand how best to understand perfectionism.
So I know we've had Gordon Flett on the podcast and you guys have worked together. But one thing we didn't really massively dive into is sort of origins of perfectionism and where it can potentially come from. And I'm really keen because I know I've looked into perfectionism. I've even sort of done a lot of self-diagnosis of myself and my own sporting journey with perfectionism, looking into where did my perfectionistic tendencies come from. So if there's someone that's listening to this show and they're thinking, okay, I think I'm a perfectionist. I even throw out this phrase of saying, oh, I'm such a perfectionist. Where is it possible that has come from?
Right. Okay. So essentially, perfectionism is a personality characteristic, right? And much like other personality characteristics, everyone has it to some degree, right? So just like some people are more or less neurotic or more or less conscientious, some people are more or less perfectionistic. Some people are extremely perfectionistic. Some people have very low levels of perfectionism, and most of us are somewhere in between. And as a trait / disposition, the origins can be kind of located in very similar places to other traits. So there's a degree of heritability, in your genes, we have propensities to have certain characteristics. So perfectionism, we do know, has a degree of heritability, but also it's learned, reinforced through engagement in the environment. And that starts with the home, it starts with the family, it starts with parents. Most of the work looking at the development of perfectionism focuses on parental behavior. So whether or not your parents are perfectionistic and you kind of model that behavior, or whether you respond to their perfectionism, the demands that are being placed on you by striving for perfection, or even that your parents are quite anxious about life in general, or kind of trying to do a good job being a parent, and that can kind of that anxiousness can kind of translate into a fear of making mistakes. So there's lots of different developmental pathways that you can study to better understand the behaviours of parents or other significant others around you, and how that might instill in you this sense that mistakes are bad and that they should be avoided. And that one way to avoid those mistakes and flaws is to strive for perfection and attach kind of an irrational sense of importance to that perfection.
So can we just dive into that sort of trait, the environment from the parents? So sort of the inherent side of, if a parent is high achieving themselves or striving and driven for their own personal gain or their own personal goals, is that shown to be an environment that could tend to create a perfectionistic child?
Yeah, so we would probably call that modeling or social learning. They see it in a kind of a significant or revered other, your parents. For example, there is some evidence of kind of a same-sex hypothesis that sons learn it from fathers and daughters learn it from mothers. So this idea that you kind of look up to these people and you model their behaviour. So, as I say, we kind of count that as social learning. But also, kind of perfectionism doesn't just involve standards for yourself, it can also involve imposing standards on other people. And when that's the case, you can kind of imagine a family environment where if the parents are demanding of their children's achievement, that perfectionism develops as a kind of reasonable response to having those expectations imposed on you. So in that regards, it's sometimes described as kind of the expectations pathway. So you've got a modeling pathway, you've got an expectations pathway, and it just really depends on the kind of the flavors and expectations that the parents are exhibiting with regards to their expectations and how they respond to their children.
What about self-worth then? So as a child is developing their self-worth, as we're growing up in an environment like that, does that then place a lot of pressure on achieving in order to feel valued, and creating sort of extrinsic motivated individuals that are goal driven, outcome driven, and things like that?
Yeah, there's a really great line from Thomas Greenspan, and he says that perfectionism isn't a motivational issue; it's a self-esteem issue. So at the heart of perfectionism is this kind of creation of a conditional or contingent sense of self-esteem. And the extreme achievement behaviors and striving you'll often see that characterizes what we think of when we think of perfectionism or perfectionist are really acts of reparation, to try and prove one's self-worth through the achievements in school, in the workplace, or in sport. So really the kind of mechanism, the engine that underpins the striving is the attempt to illustrate that self-worth and self-esteem, but for some reason is never fully internalized or stabilized. It's it energizes a kind of validation seeking behavior. So when we think about where it's coming from, and when we think about the impact of parents or coaches or teachers are having, perfectionism or any type of behaviors that teach people that you're only worthwhile if you achieve great things, you have a great job, you're really successful in sport, you're better than your sibling, or better than your peers, is really playing into the center point, the starting point of perfectionistic behavior.
But do we know that, because it's such a paradox? We know, we've spoken about it in previous episodes about this paradox of perfectionism, that you can strive for it, it's going to create achievement or just driving towards a goal, and then the striving of excellence, but at the same time there are consequences that come of it. I really think, and I don't know whether this is just because it's kind of coming up now, there's a lot of tennis going on. I watch Breakpoint on Netflix, and then I've seen the film King Richard. And that, have you seen that film?
I haven't. I haven't seen that film, but in terms of talking about tennis and parents, Andre Agassi's book
Yes, yeah,
is like a
Open.
great exemplar of the impact of parental pressure, and the paradox that you just described there. It energizes huge, extraordinary effort within these people, but also it comes with a kind of psychological toll and exhaustive effect particularly when things don't go wrong. And of course, there's a kind of availability bias or a survivorship bias here, right? We can pick out these people who are perfectionistic and really, really successful, and may or may not be exhibiting these costs that we're describing. But for every one of those, there are going to be hundreds, thousands of people who haven't survived their own perfectionism and haven't achieved in the same way that these people have achieved. So if you kind of zoom out a little bit and take on kind of a lifespan, career span, developmental perspective on the impacts of perfectionism, as people move through the talent development system, the attrition due to perfectionism is much more likely to outweigh the idea that it's going to drive people to like excellence or kind of careers that we're picking up on.
So essentially, we're saying there that we're going to lose more people to perfectionism than we are going to get excellent athletes who are prone to this.
Absolutely. I think the thing that characterizes people like Andre Agassi, these kind of perfectionistic athletes, is not their perfectionism. That doesn't characterize their success. What characterizes them is their ability to not to succumb to the negative elements of their perfectionism.
Right.
And it's really those other factors that we should concern ourselves with. We should go, why is it that this single person has been able not to or to remain successful despite carrying around this backpack filled with fears, anxieties, vulnerabilities to mental health issues, and of course, lots of the case studies that we can pick up on, like Andre Agassi, Amanda Beard, is another great example. In addition to having immense athletic success, they also, in very vivid terms, describe the turmoil and the stress and strain that has been on them across their athletic careers. And I think, depending on what area of sport you work in and what your particular interests are, talent development, or if you're working in really elite, high pressured environments, that's always the counterweight that you have to have in the back of your mind about perfectionism. At what cost
Mm.
are we developing and working with athletes? And if we are inadvertently, accidentally encourage or intentionally encouraging perfectionism in athletes, I think we have to be mindful of the kind of duty of care element, and also the kind of the subsequent potential negative effects we know exist.
So some of those negative consequences that you're saying, people are what I'm hearing is you're having to endure those negative consequences, or the people that can endure those negative consequences are the ones that potentially don't succumb to that. And so, what characterize some of those consequences? What could that be for people that may not know?
Yeah, so there is a large amount of meta-analytical evidence. So this is where we take large amounts of evidence and we kind of distill it down into typical effects, right? So like across 20 studies, what do we typically find, right? So outside of sport, there's a large number of these studies that show that perfectionism, even the elements that sometimes people think are useful, like striving really hard and setting exceptionally high, unrealistically high standards, even those elements are related to things like depression, eating disorders, suicidality. So that's ideation and suicide attempts, burnout. So there's a whole raft of these subclinical and clinical outcomes that sit as this kind of counterweight to this idea that this may or may not energize apparently desirable behaviors that may or may not be useful to athletes.
It's so interesting because in a previous episode we spoke to um, Mustafa Sakar about his the need for resilience in different environments, and those environments that you can create are, I mean, he talked about his challenge support matrix, and yeah, it's I'm just thinking of the environments in which you're in, and where that perfectionism essentially just becomes more rife, and how it can be intensified depending on the coaches, the parents, others in your team. What about perfectionism in a team? What have you found within team environments and perfectionism?
I think the first thing to say about perfectionism in teams and in groups is, it's quite hard to be perfectionistic, but it's even harder to live with one. Like, live with other people who are perfectionistic, right? Like, there's a lot of evidence outside of the sport about how it can kind of erode social bonds. Like, if it's the kind of interpersonal kind of hassles thing, like, or the way they cope, the more kind of conflict orientated forms of coping, There's a really cool study called kind of Caught in a Bad Romance about how like perfectionism can predict kind of well-being in romantic partners. That's the backdrop for the discussion about kind of perfectionism in teams.
I just want to talk about this because I think
Okay.
this is so interesting because there's this culture that's going on in the world, the ick culture. Do you know what icks are? Have you heard this?
No, no.
So it's a thing that a lot of I'm 33, but I'm still gonna say young people. They will talk about and say that I get the ick from someone. It gives you like an icky feeling when this person
Right,
does this thing. It is 100% built out of other orientated perfectionism. I'm
right.
wanting you to be perfect. Therefore, if you
Okay.
don't do this thing and meet this standard, then I feel this isn't right for me.
Right,
And
right,
then I
right.
always think to people, I say, well, do you hold yourself to that same standard? Because you're
Mm,
holding other people to an unrealistic standard sometimes. And yeah, it's a really interesting one, especially in the dating world. You see people going, "Oh, it was going so well until they literally did this and it gave me the ick." And you're like, well, this is a very minor thing that they've done. Like we're
yeah.
talking about, oh, I just wore the wrong color shoes or something like that. It's wild.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the two elements of perfectionism that tend to be problematic in interpersonal relationships are the tendency to impose perfectionistic standards on other people, right? But also, interestingly, surprisingly, also the perception that other people, important people around you, expect you to be perfect, right? Socially prescribed perfectionism. That's
Yeah.
kind of an oppressive kind of environment to be in. This idea that other people are constantly expecting you to be a certain way, dress a certain way, behave a certain way, as opposed to just be your imperfect self. Like, and that they're going to like you or love you or value you for being you with all your flaws. So it's the kind of you have to kind of bear in mind the two bits, right? The kind of proactive oppressive, dominant leader type figure that people tend to think about from an other oriented perfectionism, but also just this general internalized belief that being in an environment where those kind of uncompromising expectations can have on your ability to connect meaningfully with other people. So we can imagine how that might play out in sport, like whether or not teammates can get along. Social cohesion, is important for longevity of teams. We might think from a task cohesion perspective. Shared sense of goals could be a good thing, right? Like if everyone kind of buys into it. So again, we could expect to see like one thing counterbalancing the other. And then, so outside of that, we have started studying something we call perfectionistic climate. So perfectionistic climate are the information, cues, messages that exist in the environment, normally from leaders, so coaches in particular, that give athletes the sense that perfect performance is required and necessary, and imperfect performance, so i.e., flaws and mistakes, are not tolerated. So we have just started this line of work, kind of studying the consequences of finding yourself in a perfectionistic climate. And from our perspective, the appeal is historically perfectionism has been viewed as an individual issue and as an individual problem. But we think perfectionism can be studied as a quality of the social or team environment rather than a quality of the individual. So you might find yourself suffering the consequences of perfectionism, but not being perfectionistic yourself as a consequence of finding yourself in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I mean, we're currently in the middle of, well, we just started the Ashes. So cricket has started with the Ashes, and for those who may not be watching cricket or know anything about it, there is a format in which the England cricket team have adopted that's been rightly or wrongly given the name Bazball, which is Brendan McCullum. The head coach is called Baz, and the approach that he has created to the team is one that is based around messages of we're allowed to fail, We're going to go out there and try and entertain. We may not get it right every time. We don't want everyone to think that they have to, well, they're striving to win every game. There's a difference. They're wanting to win every game, but they want to entertain and also realize that if they are to fear failure and not be themselves and be authentic, then that's not what they want to do. And it's created a team that are currently under this new leadership. They're 12 wins and 2 losses. And they've played some of the most incredible series. And they're just all of the information that keeps coming out from that dressing room in the media is built around it's a climate that is imperfect, essentially. They're embracing that imperfection. So I'm really curious to find out more about that, and as it keeps unfolding throughout the series and see how long it holds up. But I also came from an environment where it was incredibly perfectionistic when I first went into that team. Now, there's this, I think it's just constant with perfectionism, this double-edged sword that you get with it, that I went into that environment and there was high pressure, there was really high standards, and it was well known, and it was it was high standards from the coaches, high standards from the team. And I can literally position myself as an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old in that environment and think I was terrified. I feared every move that I made. I feared getting things wrong. I was held to a standard that my skill set was not up to sometimes. And that created massive amounts of doubt. That created huge amount of pressure. But then on the other side of it, I look at it and I go, my learning was so fast, and my ability to sort of paddle up with this stream and this need that was created allowed me to develop. And I never know where to go with that, whether to go and this was good for me. It came with huge consequences. And what could I have done better? Yeah, there's so much going on with what I'm seeing now in the game at the very high level in England, what I experienced, and almost both are creating good outcomes. But I feel like my one made me not enjoy it as much.
Well, I guess we need to think about what the kind of long-term consequences are of the two types of environment, right? And how hospitable are they for long-term team development and long-term team success? Like, on one hand, you might get kind of short, sharp performance outcomes at the cost of some people coming into that environment and not being able to cope. Some people in that environment, underperforming relative to where they may perform as a consequence of carrying the burden of those worries and fears, versus this other environment that you're describing there, that is permitting risk taking. It's permitting mistakes in the pursuit of kind of similar exceptional excellence in a sporting context. So, unfortunately, that the environment we're describing here isn't common enough for us to have enough data points to say, well, what if we do it this way? Like, what are the additional benefits, performance outcomes that come as a consequence of purposefully and intentionally constructing elite level environments in this way? Because if they're not the norm is what you experience. And so, it is really, when we speak about perfectionism, it can be really difficult to convince people sometimes that there are better ways of doing this, and that perfectionism ultimately is kind of this kind of false answer to the question about how do you consistently get high level performance out of athletes, continual success. What is the magic ingredient? Personally, I think the empirical evidence suggests that perfectionism, people are successful despite their perfectionism, as I said earlier, rather than because of it. And I think that extends to the climate, to the environment. And then you go, okay, let's take the environment that you just described. How far are we away from some of the more extreme environments we hear about in an elite sport context? Rowing, gymnastics, cycling, they've all had their own issues associated with the climate that are being created, and with athlete welfare sitting at the periphery of their attempts to be successful in those sports. the kind of maltreatment of athletes is increasingly the focus of sport and exercise psychology and funders of sports that use the public purse. So I think we have to kind of be careful of tracing these environments and the indirect consequences and the inadvertent decisions you may make in pursuit of these kind of lofty successes that we hope to obtain.
It was a really interesting story that came out of I think it was in the first 10 episodes of this show. Rich Hosseini, who was a strength and conditioning coach at the time. Well, not at the time. He had been a strength and conditioning coach for Team China diving, their diving team. Now, if you've ever watched the Olympics, anyone listening, at Team China in diving, it is their gymnastics and diving. They are elite in that area. They win gold medal after gold medal. And he recounts this story of going into a training block when they were practicing new dives. And he saw this diver go for a new attempt at a dive. It was a really high difficulty and basically messed it up. And I hope probably belly flopped into the water. And he kind of looked around and thought, okay, how does the regime work here? And expecting that athlete, sort of in his own mind of sort of thinking about what China's disciplinary record might be, he thought, oh, they're going to drag him out and they're just going to nail him and go again and just sort of beat them with a stick sort of thing, that approach. He said as that athlete came out of the water, they're all applauding him. They're all like cheering, hollering. And it was built off the fact that they actually attempted something that was really, really difficult, but they just messed it up. They recognized that messing it up was just a part of the growth, which is amazing to hear. Like, that's an insanely interesting approach for these athletes to take, that you would think they would just be so striving for perfectionism, and if it's anything shy, then let's not bother with it. But it was a really cool story that he brought, and as I've developed along this road, I've thought, wow, you kind of don't know what's going on in those inner sanctums. You kind of see the result that is perfect, almost literally tens, but from it has been failure after failure, and embracing it and encouraging it.
I think it's just really unlikely that perfectionism, given what we just described, that where it comes from, right? These kind of need to validate oneself, would sustain someone long enough to accrue the expertise with all the road bumps and setbacks, along the way. I just find it extremely difficult to wrap my head around the idea that it would sustain people long enough to become that elite, and that there aren't other factors like being exceptionally talented, having other psychological, physical attributes that are the reason why that as we said, that people are kind of surviving this perfectionistic quality they may or may not have.
So people who may be perfectionistic, I've read a fair bit, I suppose, your work about burnout and perfectionism, and that it can lead to burnout. I also read a piece that you'd done on perfectionism potentially being on the rise. And so what are you seeing? What do you see with burnout? Are you actually seeing that rise in burnout at the moment? Are we currently in more perfectionistic climates than we've ever been? And is that attributing to burnout, especially in sport?
Yeah. So one of the advantages you have when you're measuring things like perfectionism and burnout is people tend to use more or less the same instrument, and for a long period of time. So what that allows you to do is kind of retrospectively gather up all the scores being generated by these questionnaires, and then kind of plot them to answer those kind of questions. Is burnout increasing? Is perfectionism increasing? So some work with Thomas Curran and some work with Daniel Madigan, we've done exactly that. So you can see what is happening in terms of perfectionism scores. So we found that all dimensions of perfectionism, so expecting it of yourself, expecting it of other people, and believing that other people expect you to be perfect, have increased over the last 25 years. So young people are more perfectionistic, according to these questionnaires, than they've ever been. And we recently did the same for burnout, and we found similar effects. suspects that symptoms of burnout are increasing over time. The tricky thing is to try and figure out why, right? Like,
Yeah.
why is this happening? Like, you can kind of zoom in and can kind of zoom out to try and uncover potential mechanisms for why that is. At the broadest sense, I think the starting point for explaining it is to go, okay, we can all agree that being a young person or a young athlete 30 years ago was probably the environments they found themselves in was probably different from what we are now, right? Like in various different ways. So if they are different, in what ways are they different, right? Like, so you end up kind of being drawn to things like, social media. You end up being drawn towards how the education system has changed, how parental practices might have changed, kind of competitive individualism, how people's priorities and sensitivities or attitudes have changed over time. I guess in a nutshell, what you could argue is that we find ourselves at the broadest level in a much more perfectionistic society, like than 25 years ago. Even the kind of visual culture we find ourselves in, and the availability of these type of imagery. The idea that you can have the perfect lifestyle, you can perfect yourself, like, and that you should actively try and do that, like, seems to be a very contemporary or message to young people. So it is really tricky to unpack it, and you do end up speculating. But as I say, because the questionnaires are used pretty consistently, you can track this trend. And I guess most worryingly, because this is an upward trend, it would suggest that as we move into the future, this trend is going to continue. So athletes are going to be, and young people are going to potentially be more perfectionistic and potentially experiencing greater levels of burnout. And that relationship, we've studied that quite a lot actually, and that relationship is pretty consistent, particularly when you look at perfectionism that includes perceptions of external pressures. That consistently is positively related with high levels of stress, high levels of burnout. So coming back to the major theme of whether or not this thing is useful, burnout is something you're going to have to manage and maintain and work past if you're going to be successful as a perfectionistic athlete.
I think there was something interesting I read in that paper was around that sports participation is always on the rise. That creates a bigger pool of people to compete against. And also, if you think about it, standards are not dropping in sports. Everything around sport and high performance is just asking more. So how can we get more? How can we be faster? How can we be better? So with that, that's literally all of this. We need you to be more perfect. We need you to be more amazing. We need you to be more high performing. Got to be faster, stronger, better. Can't eke out, can't. And what records do you want to break? Like, how many gold medals do you need? Like, that I think it is just increasing from my own sort of anecdotal view. And yeah, with that, we've got to be aware of, okay, how do we manage if we just got to be aware of the negative consequences and then recognize how to manage those along the way, because that's kind of going back to the Agassi conversation around it. Clearly someone who can manage those negative consequences longer might start to see the outcomes. So if someone is potentially feeling these negative consequences, in your opinion and professional research and advice, how can we help protect ourselves against them?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to say is that because perfectionism is associated with greater risk to mental health difficulties, if you have kind of concerns about yourself or others, you should seek professional support, for those mental health issues. For people who just kind of want to live better with their perfectionistic qualities, there's lots of things you can do. Like, in a recent edited text, a couple of the authors were arguing for kind of greater self-compassion, for more rational approaches to the goals that you have and how you think about yourself, and in trying to kind of reconcile, compassionate pursuit of kind of perfect goals or rational pursuit of perfectionistic goals. I kind of coined the phrase imperfectionism. Be more imperfectionistic. Have lofty goals, but give yourself a break Like, don't be so kind of self-critical. Separate your sense of self-esteem and self-worth kind of from the pursuit of those goals. So I think the idea of imperfectionism is quite interesting because it kind of still allows that kind of real high reach and stretch. Like outside of that, from a motivational perspective, even better than still pursuing these kind of often unrealistic goals. We just set optimally challenging goals, right? Like that they're reasonable, that they're realistic, that you can adjust them, that they suit your abilities, the circumstances. That's the best thing to do from a maintaining motivational perspective. And of course, there are other people that offer alternatives, like Patrick Goudreau at Ottawa University talks about excellentism, as in like, isn't excellence enough? Can we stop at being excellent versus pursuing perfection, but by definition, relative to excellentism and the notion of being unrealistic standards is somewhat futile and irrational. Like, so he kind of argues for this kind of distinction and stopping short of excellence. So there are things that people can do, but in a nutshell, I think because perfectionism is about reparation, self-criticism, just being a little easier on yourself, like when things don't go wrong, a little bit more accepting of imperfection.
I think it was in. I can't, correct me if I'm wrong. It might have been in one of your papers or Daniel Madigan's about self-acceptance mediating that, and I think it might have been linked with burnout, injury, but it was essentially built around perfectionism.
Yeah. So one of the mechanisms we think links perfectionism to burnout is the pursuit of self-acceptance. Like, and that doesn't even take into account kind of being accepted by others. Just this kind of internal drive to try and achieve something, and the relief that might come, the respite that might come as a consequence of achieving something exceptional. So we think that's definitely key. And of course, rational emotive behavior therapy and the idea of Albert Ellis is that pursuing or achieving unconditional self-acceptance. Knowing that you have value, knowing that you don't need to prove your value or self-esteem through the achievements you have. So it's there in the literature, like as something that might support people with their perfectionism.
I think even as someone who is a perfectionist and has suffered from it, but down to things like the stories I've mentioned there and my upbringing in professional sport and just the climates that I've been in, if someone is listening that they are perfectionistic, from my own experience and working hard to combat it and manage it better, don't even think that process is going to be perfect either. Like, almost I'm starting to set those imperfect goals for my perfectionism because I'm thinking, right, well, tomorrow I'm just going to wake up and be purely accepting of everything that I'm striving. Like, I can fail, like, that's fine. I almost think of it as like, okay, if I want 10 out of 10 times for me to view a situation as I'm embracing imperfection and not fearing failure, it's like, well, that is a ridiculous like standard to set myself to. That's too perfect. So why not set an imperfection goal and go, okay, well, if I start to see the needle move 1 or 2 times more, or I catch myself not accepting the situation more, and then recognizing that it's an actual process that, if I really think about it, I'm 7 years out of professional sport. I'm still working on it, and it's an ongoing process, and I don't think it will end. I almost don't think it will end, but I'm feeling better in those moments when I feel the negative consequences that we've spoken about, that fear of failure. I feel like I don't feel it as much. I feel it. I definitely have it because I still want to strive. I still want to go for excellence. I still want to develop, but I'm recognizing that hopefully more often than not, I'm accepting that fear of failure, not doubting myself as much. But yeah, for anyone listening, it's a journey. I think it is a definite journey.
Yeah, I think people who are perfectionistic, they don't need any help on the old goal setting front in terms of set. They'll find some goals to be set. Like what they need help with is the self-evaluation, the evaluative process, what it means when you fall short of goals. Of course, as we spoke about, we know what optimal goals look like, but in the main, it's about feeling okay when you fall short of those goals. It's about self-kindness, self-compassion, doing things because you enjoy doing them. You might not feeling legitimate, or feeling like it's okay to do things that you're bad at, but you like doing. Those kind of things can help with the journey that you just described. The world's not going to end if you know your decorating isn't quite perfect. You haven't cut in kind of quite right, or you've scuffed your car, or your trainers. Living and existing kind of imperfectly is a great antidote to kind of irrational internal drive for perfectionism.
This has been a brilliant episode, and I just want to ask one last thing before we go. So, if we've spoken about there from an individual's point of view, but if there's maybe a parent or a coach listening that's going, "Oh, do you know what? I am putting on a little bit of too high standards, or maybe I've realised I'm being a bit perfectionistic, and I'm a bit worried about what that can do for those that I'm looking out for and hoping to develop around me." What would you advise for parents or coaches that may be feeling perfectionism so that they don't necessarily pass that on?
Yeah, yeah, it's really challenging, right? Being a coach is really tough, and being a parent is probably the hardest job in the world. So I'm always reluctant to kind of give that kind of advice. I, I think ultimately, reflection and thinking about kind of purposefully and intentionally doing things, right? Sort of not just letting things happen and kind of spiral out of control, but purposely think about the language you use, purposely think about how you constructed tasks or you respond to things. It might not be the way you want to naturally respond to something, but you might have to purposely and intentionally do something else, something as an alternative to give or project the message that mistakes are fine, that errors are fine. Even the anxiousness, I think, is probably the role of anxiousness in parenting and coaching is probably underappreciated. How anxious we are to keep the people we're safeguarding safe, and well. But even that anxiousness can lead to young people internalizing this sense that mistakes shouldn't be made because bad things will happen. So I guess the long-winded way is this kind of self-reflective process of purposely thinking through what will happen if I say this, what will happen? If I say this, what will happen? And try to exert a greater degree of control over your interactions with people. And inside, you might be feeling just as anxious,
Mm.
but you might be thinking, actually, this is going to be great for them. They might fall off the bike, right? But overall, they're going to benefit. So, I mean, it is really tricky. And sometimes I think I'm not the best kind of place to tell other people how to do this, because just like everyone else, I'm imperfect. But just wanting it to do better and figure this out, I think is enough for me.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things I've found not only helping people with coaching, but also having been coached myself, is that every time you fail, every time there is a failure that you experience, you've just found one other way of how not to do it, and that's okay. That's great. We're one step closer to finding the right way to do it that could work, and it's an ongoing process. So yeah, look, Andy, thank you so much for your time. Just one that I always ask people on the podcast: is there anything that you're currently reading, watching, or something that you recommend that has inspired you, and that it could be a quote, it could be a film, a documentary, a book, anything that you are usually recommending people?
Well, my guilty pleasure is autobiographies, really, of athletes. I love reading about other people, particularly athletes. I'm trying to think what the last one I read. I mean, I mentioned Amanda Beard. Like, it's quite an old autobiography, actually, but she's an Olympian. She describes herself as perfectionistic, and has dealt with a great deal of adversity, personally, and in her career. So in those regards, it's pretty inspiring and pretty insightful for the life of an athlete living with perfectionism. So I'd recommend picking up her autobiography.
Brilliant. And where's the best place for people to follow you, find you? Yeah, where can I send them?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. We also have a university research repository where we upload our research, but we also upload kind of coaching resources, educational resources, animations around perfectionism in an attempt to kind of educate people about what this is, and what its consequences are. So just Google me, you'll find it.
Love it. I'll put those links in the show notes, for people, and those resources are going to be more than helpful and handy, especially for, I think, in coaching environments and I'm excited to see where the coaching, the climate stuff gets to, the perfectionism climate stuff, and I'm looking forward to finding out more about it and seeing how it unfolds. But thank you so much for your time, Andy. It's been brilliant. It was an imperfect start. It's been imperfect along the way, and I couldn't think of any better way to have it. So, yeah, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. Thanks for your insight and involvement as well. Always a pleasure to talk about perfectionism. So thanks for the invitation.